In the Democratic Republic of Congo, reports have surfaced that the South African army is operating under difficult conditions. City Press is reporting that more than 600 soldiers deployed in the Southern African Development Community Mission in the DRC have to contend with below-par conditions with inadequate ablution facilities, no field kitchens or doctors or nurses on hand for emergencies. Now, in February, 2 soldiers were killed and 3 left injured after a mortar bomb landed inside one of the South African contingency military bases. The soldiers are part of the SANDF mission deployed to support and assist the DRC's government to restore peace, security as well as stability. Now, joining us to unpack these reports is Advocate Pikkie Greef. He is the SA National Defence Union's National Secretary. Mr. Greef, good evening and thank you very much for your time.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
No, it's a pleasure to have you with us. So the DRC mission is somewhat proving to be the most testing for South Africa's army. Just last month, we reported on the deaths, and now we hear of the very worrying basic living conditions that they're operating under. Firstly, what have the troops deployed there stated to your union on their conditions?
Well, to tell you the truth, none of the troops have reported this to the union. We also only heard it through the media, and then we did some inquiries and verified some of those allegations that are made in the media report that you referred to. Yeah, that's really bad conditions, especially as far as medical equipment is concerned, field kitchen equipment is concerned, and so on. And there's no cash or place to keep cash safely in the base, so the base can't pay its local service providers. And then the most niggling point is that there is no air freight capability at this stage to get equipment from the Republic or from other southern countries into the DRC. So that's a problem.
Now, Pikkie, one wouldn't want to contribute to unnecessary alarm without proper appreciation of the terrain. Just talk us through the process of setting up a base. It's an open piece of land. Ablution facilities would be rudimentary at best. No one is expecting fancy toilets, granted. However, it seems the ratio of ablution facilities to the troops is quite worrisome. So talk us through that particular process of setting up a base, including the needs analysis that would be conducted.
I think the first thing that we need to realize here is in this context, it's not an entirely new base. The bases that was featured in this article are bases that existed already under the UN deployment. But when the UN started withdrawing from that country, a lot of the infrastructure was UN infrastructure, and that went with them. So that required our troops basically to go into those areas which once were bases and try and re-establish it. But in this case, it would be a base from which offences are planned, and not a defensive base, where peacekeeping missions are sent out from. So the bases differ. So that's number one. The second thing is ablution. Yes, if there's no fixed ablution in a deployment, which very often happen, there's very specific protocols and standard operating procedures about how sanitation matters are dealt with. And so it's entirely in the hands of the soldiers themselves as to how many ablution pits there would be. That is something that the sergeant majors in that battalion have control of, and they should get their troops to upgrade the ablution facilities or make more of them. Why that hasn't happened is not clear. But as far as the other issues are concerned, that's completely out of their hands. What one would plan for such a large mission abroad, it's a vast logistical exercise, to transport vehicles and medical equipment and all kinds of military equipment by air or by land, by sea. It's a vast logistical exercise. It's an expensive exercise. And certainly it doesn't have those ducks in a row, so to speak. Your deployment is going to be pretty disastrous.
Now, I've noted something rather interesting with the latest living conditions reports. The conversation around budgetary constraints is a big one, but it's now placing greater emphasis on the fact that it's the end of the financial year, funds are depleted, all should be well soon. But we've been reporting on budgetary issues long before the financial year end. So would it honestly be accurate for some to attribute the financial issues to the common scenario of depleted funds at year end?
Well, I mean, the problems that the troops are facing now, these things that is reported on, that is a direct result of budget constraints in the Defence Force. We are now seeing that at a practical level. Now that we have to operate on our own and pay our own way, so to speak, and not rely on UN money anymore, now these budget constraints become very, very clear. And it's a simple fact. We could have chartered aircraft. Was it not for the fact that it's the end of the financial year and there is simply no money left? So one can't even charter aircraft. The aircraft that the DRC would have provided, for some reason, is not is suitable to fly with now. And yeah, well, I think what you're simply seeing on the ground is the practical effect of the annual budget cuts that's been going on over the past decade, and which we've been warning that one day there's going to be a disaster, or it's going to become a very big problem.
Would you say the withdrawal of the UN's peacekeeping mission, MONUSCO, was probably ill-advised?
Well, you know, I mean, if the host country doesn't want them there, then there's pretty much not much that they can do about it. But it has left the SADC parties, or the other remaining parties, in a bit of a lurch, in the sense that they now have to rely on their own resources. And that, unfortunately, is not so readily available as we can see. And that, mind you, as far as logistical capability and transport capability is concerned on a big scale, many of our SADC neighbors suffer from the same problems as we do.
Now, not to be an alarmist, but many have reported on the reinvigorated, if you will, M23, which has sophisticated weaponry. Would such an adversary not pose a serious threat to our men alongside the Congolese forces, especially with that withdrawal of the UN peacekeeping mission?
Oh, they do pose a big threat. I don't think we should, tread lightly around it, the fact that they are at great peril. And that is exactly why our troops out there need the proper support, and they need it very quickly.